Hello and welcome. Welcome everybody to another of our Gallery Teachers English Masterclasses. So today we will be looking at some really useful functional language. We're looking about, we're looking at how to interrupt someone politely, interrupting someone to give information. Okay, so this is the first context we'll look at. So this might be simply because, say, you are again in a work situation, you know there is a business meeting in progress, but you need to interrupt the meeting to pass on some kind of message. Yes, to give someone some important information or to let them know something. Maybe that, let's say, a guest is waiting to speak with them, right, in the waiting room, for example. So we know, of course, it's not polite to interrupt, but sometimes we simply need to. Here's some expressions we can use to do this. I'm sorry to interrupt, but now notice the underlined expressions are really useful polite phrases we can repeat and recycle in different contexts, right? So here's some examples. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to tell you something, right? Or I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're needed in the next room, okay? Or you're needed elsewhere. Again, really polite, we have please excuse me for interrupting. So notice we have to interrupt, but we have for interrupting. Remember, we use ing after prepositions like for. Please excuse me for interrupting, but example, you have a call, right? Or please excuse me for interrupting, but I need to let you know some important information. I apologize for the interruption. Okay, this is another structure we can use. I apologize for the interruption. But for example, someone is waiting for you. You can say someone is waiting for you on the line, on the phone, or someone is waiting for you at reception, for example. This is another nice one. We have, I hate to interrupt, right? Again, very, very nice, very polite. I hate to interrupt, but I need to give you a message. Or sorry, I need to give a message to Ian, for example. Or with the same meaning as give, we have the phrasal verb pass on. I need to pass on a message to Ian. Okay, so notice these useful expressions. I'm sorry to interrupt. Excuse me for interrupting. I apologize for the interruption. Okay, so notice for interrupting or for the interruption, alternatives. And of course, I hate to interrupt. So interrupting to give information, especially useful in a business context. Let's look at some more. Interrupting to join a conversation, right? So imagine you're at a networking event for your work, or you are, let's say, at a social event like a party. Maybe you don't know many people. You see different groups of people having discussions and you want to join one. Okay, a lot of us, especially if we're more introverted, feel nervous about doing this. But as long as we do it politely, we're almost always welcome, right? So typically, we begin this with a question, right? Would you mind if I joined in? Or simply, could I join you? Notice with these short questions, we often have a rising intonation to indicate a question. May I jump in? So notice interchangeable, we have could and may, all right? Just and can, of course, but could and may are the most polite forms. I couldn't help overhearing. I couldn't help but overhear. So maybe, remember, overhearing is for when we want to talk about that we were almost accidentally listening to a conversation and we noticed maybe a name we recognize, or we noticed an interesting discussion topic that maybe we have an opinion about. So quite often, if we're listening to someone else's conversation and then we want to join them, we might say, I'm sorry, or I couldn't help, overhearing what you were discussing, for example. And then we have butt in. So if you butt into something, that means that you interrupt to join someone. So you can, if you want to be polite, start with a little apology, like sorry to butt in, or could I butt in here? And of course, the classic, mind if I join you? Which is really nice. So here, these are some great expressions, especially if we don't know the people very well in the discussion group that we want to join. Some really nice language we can use. Yes, of course. Now, let's imagine you are involved in a discussion and you are listening to someone giving a lot of information. We might need to interrupt that person in order to ask a question. Quite often this will happen in a work context or in a study context, okay? If you're at school or university studies, you might need to interrupt to ask for clarification, to make sure that you fully understand what is being said before more information is given, right? But of course, this involves interrupting. So how can we do that politely? Here we have, again, useful, repeatable phrases are underlined. I'm sorry to interrupt. Again, we often start with a little apology. I'm sorry to interrupt, but could I ask a quick question? Or may I ask a question? Okay, we could keep it as simple as that. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I'm not sure I understand. And this shows that we need clarification of some kind. And of course, we could be a bit more clear about this. We could say, sorry for the interruption, or words like this, but I want to check that I've understood properly. Could I ask a question? Excuse me, that last sentence there should actually be a question with a question mark. But it's a great expression. Sorry for interrupting, but I want to check that I've understood properly. Could I ask a question? And then a little bit more informal. So imagine we know each other quite well. We might go for the last one in bold. Excuse me, can I jump in with a question? So when we talk about to jump in, it's a bit like to butt in, and it's a little bit less formal. So here we have, again, we often start with an apology, then we ask to ask a question, right? We express that we want to ask a question. So there we have interrupting for giving information, for asking questions, and now for sharing an opinion. So this might be social, academic, or business, right? You want to give your opinion on a discussion, okay, that's being discussed. Maybe one speaker is dominating, but you also want to share what you think, right? You might agree, you might disagree. You might have your own ideas and suggestions. How can we do that without causing offense? Again, we often start with a little apology, such as, excuse me, could I jump in? And this time, the more formal alternative is, may I interject? Okay. Do you mind if I say something? Or do you mind if I add something? If you don't mind, I'd like to add my idea, my thought, my take on this. Really nice expression. If you don't mind, I'd like to say something. Sorry to interrupt, but before we move on, I'd like to share my thoughts on this, or my thoughts on this topic. So move on means for the discussion to continue. So here we're really saying that before we talk anymore, I really want to share my idea on this topic. And of course, we have the simple, could I say something quickly? Or may I add something quickly? So again, you're just asking permission really to give your own thought and opinion on something. Or rather, you're expressing that this is what you intend to do, but you're doing so in a polite way. A few more. Now here, these are really nice because here what we're doing is we're taking a comment or a thought that maybe the speaker has had, and then we are commenting on that thought, or we're giving our own opinion about it. So for example, when we do this, we can say things like, what you say reminds me of, oh, that's an interesting point. That makes me think of, or that reminds me about something else, right? It's a clever way to include your own ideas and topics based on what someone else has said. It's interesting you say that because you could say, I had a really different experience when I visited that country. Okay, maybe they're talking about their holiday. You say, that's interesting you say that because I didn't experience that at all. Particularly if we're talking about agreeing and disagreeing, you can say things like, that might be true, but don't you think, or that may be true, but don't you agree? And your thought about, or what you say about something sounds like, and then you give your own opinion. So here we're directly addressing or commenting what has previously been said. And the last reason why we might want to interrupt someone is actually quite a nice one. It's to involve another person. Sometimes in discussions, one or two people might dominate the discussion, whereas we know that other people have valuable comments to make as well. So how can we do that? And this is particularly useful, I think, in a work or study context. I'd really like to hear what Simona, for example, I'd really like to hear what Simona thinks about that. Or I'd be interested to know Simona's opinion about that. Maybe Simona could tell her thoughts about this. So we're taking Simona as an example. So here it's a polite but encouraging way to involve another person in the discussion, maybe a more reluctant speaker.